We arrived in Las Vegas just past midnight, exhausted but elated, still wrapped in that first week of marriage warmth that makes even airport terminals feel romantic. The city blinked alive outside the taxi window, a shimmering mirage of promises and distraction. Room 1917, I read off the card, chuckling. Lucky number 19. My wife, Lila, smiled, brushing her dark hair behind her ear. Strange number. Is a 19 an odd floor? We didn't think much of it. Not then. The verdant Rose Hotel towered above the Strip, a relic of old Vegas charm, surrounded by modern neon giants. It wasn't flashy, but there was a kind of timelessness about its facade. The carved stonework, the Art Deco elevators, the gold-plated room keys. Everything whispered old money and old secrets. We took the elevator up, expecting the usual soft ding of floor selections. But when I pressed the button for 19, something peculiar happened. There was number 19, just 17, then straight to 20. I glanced at Lila. Maybe it's one of those buildings that skips floor numbers? She frowned. That's usually the 13th. As we hesitated, the elevator gave a low mechanical groan. Then, without my pressing anything else, the floor indicator flickered to 19. The door slid shut with a hiss. We rode in silence. The lights above us buzzed faintly. There was no elevator music, just the hum of unseen cables and something else. Something like breathing. When the doors opened again, we stepped out into a hallway that didn't match the rest of the hotel. Where the main floors were carpeted in tasteful greens and golds, this corridor was a darker, forgotten place. Faint, yellowed wallpaper peeled in corners. The sconces along the wall flickered with an orange, unnatural glow. The number plaques on the doors looked hand-painted. Maybe they're renovating this floor? I offered. Lila didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed ahead. Room 1917 stood at the very end, beneath a flickering exit sign that led nowhere. The hallway just stopped. I slid the key card in. The green light blinked once. The door creaked open like something from a haunted house. The room was cold. Not air-conditioned cold, underground cold. Cold like something had been buried in the walls. Inside, everything was off. The layout was wrong. Too long. Too narrow. The bed was pressed flush against a mirrored wall that stretched from floor to ceiling, a mirror that reflected the room perfectly, but somehow never showed us in it, unless we stood just right. The window faced a brick wall. Lila laughed nervously, trying to dispel the tension. This place has personality. I'll call the front desk, I said, but our phones had no signal. No Wi-Fi either. No landline. No room service menu. Just a thin leather-bound booklet on the nightstand. No words. Only a single page that said, "You are being watched. Do not open the door after midnight. Do not speak to the man in 1921. What the hell is this? I asked. Lila was pale. I don't like this. I shrugged it off. Some weird hotel marketing gimmick. Maybe. One of those immersive experiences rich couples pay for. We unpacked. We laughed it off. By the time we climbed into bed, the strangeness had faded a little. At 12:03 a.m., we heard it. Knocking. 3 knocks. Not at our door, but from the other side of the wall. We both sat up. More knocking. From the mirror. Or behind it. Then a voice. Muffled. Male. You shouldn't be here. Lila clutched my arm. It's a trick. Someone's messing with us. I wanted to believe that. God, I did. But then we heard the door across the hall. Room 1921. Creak open. And something stepped into the hallway. The next morning, the sky over Birch Hollow was the color of wet ash. Gray clouds clung low over the narrow streets, casting a pallid hue over everything beneath them. Ellie sat by the small window in the guest bedroom of the cottage, her hands cupped around a chipped porcelain mug of lukewarm tea. She hadn't slept. Downstairs, the kettle whistled again, a sound that repeated itself every hour, as if her aunt thought tea might be the answer to something deeper. Ellie wasn't sure what the question was anymore. She hadn't dreamed exactly. It was more like she'd drifted through corridors, endless, narrow, dimly lit, where the walls pulsed like breathing things and the shadows reached for her. When she woke, her mouth tasted like copper, and her fingernails were dirty. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Did you see them last night? She stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered over the delete button, but something, curiosity, dread, recognition, stopped her. Aunt Miriam appeared at the doorway. "You look like death, girl." Ellie looked up, startled. "Thanks. You should eat. There's porridge. I use cinnamon." Ellie stood slowly. "What do you know about the people who used to live in this house?" Aunt Miriam's face tightened. "The Rollinses? They left before you were born." "Why?" "Because sometimes a house isn't just wood and nails." She turned and disappeared down the hallway. That was the first time Ellie realized her aunt might know more than she let on. Later that day, Ellie decided to explore. She followed the winding path behind the cottage that led into the woods. Something about the silence in the trees unnerved her. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of nature, but a hush that felt expectant, like breath held in a dark room. That was when she saw him. The man stood near a crumbling stone wall, half swallowed by vines. He was dressed in dark, weathered clothing, like a traveler caught between centuries. His face was gaunt, his beard thin and gray, but it was his eyes that stopped her, pale, nearly colorless, and deeply quiet, like deep water. "You shouldn't be out here," he said without turning. Ellie's throat was dry. "I'm just walking." He nodded slowly. "They know that now." "Boo." He turned toward her fully then, and though his mouth didn't move, Ellie heard the next words inside her own skull. "The ones under the soil." She stumbled backward, heart thudding in her chest. But when she blinked, the man was gone. No footprints, no broken twigs. Just the thrum of blood in her ears. She ran. That night, she searched for him in old newspaper archives on her phone. Her fingers trembled as she typed keywords. Birch Hollow, missing people, ghost, silent man. One article appeared. 1993. Locals report seeing the quiet man near abandoned properties, described as a pale-eyed stranger who warned of something beneath. This appeared from town records in 1957, but continued to be seen. The article ended abruptly. No body, no origin, just sightings. She shut off her phone, breath quickening. Outside the cottage, the wind had picked up, making the old weather vane groan on its rusted perch. And then, the tap. 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 She turned slowly toward the window. A dirt-caked hand was pressed flat against the glass, fingers long and knotted like twisted roots. No body, no shadow, just a hand. And on the inside of the glass, a single word was drawn in condensation. Remember. The house changed after that night. Not in ways that anyone else would notice. Not in chipped paint or overturned furniture, but in the air itself. The silence deepened. The shadows lengthened. Even when sunlight streamed in through the stained glass windows in the morning, the rooms felt dim. Dust floated too slowly, like the whole house was underwater. And that ticking, faint and rhythmic, was no longer confined to the attic. I started hearing it downstairs, too. Mom and Dad tried to be normal. Dad resumed reading the newspaper every morning, and Mom would go on about local gossip. But their eyes had lost that glint of the ordinary. They looked over their shoulders more. They paused mid-sentence sometimes, as if something far away had distracted them. Once I saw Dad staring at the cellar door in the kitchen for over a minute, unmoving, with the fridge open and milk spilling down the shelves. He didn't even notice until I called his name 3 times. One afternoon, maybe 5 days after the dream in the attic, I found the basement unlocked. That was unusual. It had always been locked. Always. I stood at the top of the stairs, staring down into the shadows. A string dangled from the ceiling, swinging slightly, as if someone had just walked through it. The air that wafted up was cold and slightly metallic, carrying a smell I couldn't name, like rusted machinery mixed with wet paper. And underneath it all, ticking, soft, like it came from inside the walls. Tick, tick, tick. I flicked on a light switch. Nothing. So I grabbed a flashlight and crept down. The wooden steps groaned under my weight. At the base was the usual stuff: old paint cans, stacks of newspapers from decades ago, empty wine bottles, but all of it seemed to have shifted, like someone had rearranged it just slightly. One of Dad's old suits, long since moth-eaten, had been nailed to the far wall. That hadn't been there before. And the grandfather clock wasn't. It used to stand in the left corner. Always broken. Never moved. Now it was gone. In its place was a strange mirror, oval, with a black frame, carved in twisting shapes that resembled vines or veins. The glass was cracked across the center, forming a jagged line like a bolt of lightning. But I couldn't see my reflection in it. Instead, I saw the attic. The mirror showed the attic from above, like a surveillance camera. I could see the trunk, the chair, the hanging light bulb, and something standing in the corner, perfectly still. It was tall and thin, with a completely smooth face, like stretched porcelain. No eyes, no mouth, just a featureless surface reflecting the light bulb's weak glow. It wore a black coat, buttoned up to the neck, and its arms were long, too long. They nearly touched the floor. I blinked and stepped back. The image didn't change. It remained frozen, like the mirror had captured a single second of time. And then the mirror whispered. It wasn't in English or any language I knew. It was breathy and fragmented, like a dying person murmuring a curse. The glass vibrated. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second, the thing in the mirror moved. It turned its head toward me. Even with no face, I knew it was looking straight at me. I ran upstairs, slammed the basement door shut, and locked it. My hands were trembling so badly, I dropped the keys. I didn't tell my parents. I don't know why. Maybe I thought they wouldn't believe me. Maybe some part of me didn't want to involve them. But something had changed in the house. The ticking followed me after that. It came from vents, from behind the closet door, from inside the walls. Always distant, always faint. Never rhythmic enough to feel mechanical, more like a heartbeat. Something was alive in this house. Something had been watching us for a very long time. And the clock that used to be in the basement, I found it again the next morning, standing at the foot of my bed, and it was ticking. The moment I stepped onto the fourth floor, I noticed a difference in the air, something thicker, colder, almost pressing against my skin like a veil of gauze soaked in ice water. The hallway was darker than the others. Not dim, not poorly lit, dark, as if light itself hesitated to settle here. The flickering bulbs overhead gave off a sickly yellow glow, casting elongated shadows that seemed to shiver just out of sync with my own movements. The wallpaper, once a patterned beige, had molted into something brittle and mold-stained, curling from the corners like parchment exposed to fire. There were no nurses on this floor. No sound of rolling carts, no quiet chatter behind closed doors. Even the security cameras that had followed me earlier were absent here. It was as if the entire floor had been amputated from the rest of the hospital, left to fester in its own forgotten rot. I should have turned back. Instead, I moved forward, driven by something between dread and fascination. Every step echoed too loud against the walls. Every door I passed was sealed shut with rusted hinges and a single word scrawled in black marker above the peepholes. Unstable. One door was slightly ajar. Room 417. I froze. The air spilling out of it was different, colder, yes, but also louder. There was no sound per se, but an overwhelming sensation of noise, like the static of a dead television channel crammed directly into my skull. I pushed the door. Inside was a room exactly like the others, and yet entirely wrong. The bed was overturned. The ceiling tiles had collapsed inward, as if something had clawed its way through them. And on the walls, there were words scratched in fingernail-deep gouges. She knows who you are. You left US here. The floor remembers. Then I saw the patient chart on the floor. Patient name, Elena Morgrave. Room, 417. Diagnosis, catatonic schizophrenia with dissociative episodes. Believes herself to be divided. Responds violently to mirrors. Below the diagnosis, someone had scribbled a single line in red ink. Do not let her see herself. Suddenly, a sharp clink broke the silence. Metal on tile. Behind me. I turned. Nothing. But the door was now closed. I crossed the room, heart thudding, and pulled the handle locked. Something clicked behind me again. I turned around and saw it. A woman crouched in the far corner of the ceiling. Her arms and legs bent wrong, head twitching rapidly as if skipping frames in a video. Hair hung down in damp clumps, and her hospital gown was soaked in something darker than sweat. She opened her mouth, and nothing came out. But in my head, I heard a scream. It wasn't a sound. It was a memory of a scream, mine. The lights exploded overhead. I fell back, scrambling for the door, fumbling with the handle until it finally wrenched open behind me. I ran, not daring to look back, not even as I heard her skittering behind me, her limbs slapping the walls and ceiling in pursuit. When I burst into the stairwell, the door slammed shut on its own. Silence again, but it was different now. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt full, as if someone was pressing their face just inches from mine, watching without blinking. I descended 2 flights before I could breathe again. Later, in the hospital archives, I searched for Elena Morgrave. No records, not even a mention. But I remembered her, and I think she remembered me too. Because when I looked into the mirror above the bathroom sink that night, the reflection didn't move quite the same as I did. It smiled first. The house had grown quieter since the night of the fire in the field. Cal and Emily no longer spoke to each other in anything more than clipped sentences. Their eyes betrayed the kind of weariness usually reserved for grief. Yet neither admitted aloud what both had come to fear, that something had come back with them from that scorched hill, something that now lived within their walls. It started with the hum. At first, it was barely audible, a low, vibrating noise like the sound of distant machinery buried deep beneath the earth. Emily thought it might be the water heater or pipes shifting, but the sound had rhythm, purpose. It grew louder in the stillness of night, pulsing beneath the floorboards like a second heartbeat, always coming from the basement. They avoided that part of the house. After the second night, Cal had locked the door to the basement stairs. He even jammed a chair beneath the knob. Neither admitted how afraid they were of a door that should not have needed guarding. But it didn't stop. On the third night, Emily woke to find her phone vibrating off her nightstand, though no call or message had come in. She picked it up, screen black. Then the lights in the hallway flickered, once, twice, then died entirely. In the darkness, the hum was louder than ever. It sounded like it was breathing. The basement door began to rattle. She held her breath, frozen beneath the covers as the chair scraped slightly across the wood floor. The doorknob turned slowly, then stopped. There was no sound of footsteps, no creaking stairs, just the humming, alive and wet and wrong. By morning, everything seemed in place. Cal pretended not to notice the scrape marks where the chair had shifted. But when Emily asked him to go into town for new light bulbs, he left and didn't return until after sunset. They made a silent pact to leave the house before nightfall each day. They spent hours at the diner, watching old people argue over slices of pie, or sat silently in the parking lot of the grocery store with the radio on and the windows down. Each night they returned. The hum was louder, closer. Then came the scratching. It began at the base of the stairs. A sharp, deliberate noise, like fingernails dragging across stone. One night, Cal placed his ear to the basement door and recoiled immediately, pale and shaking. He didn't say what he heard, only that it was alive. Emily found her dreams corrupted after that. She saw the walls of the house melting into flesh, saw her hands clawing at her own chest, try to dig something out that was whispering to her in a voice older than thought. She dreamed of teeth, rows and rows of them growing from the cracks in the floor, biting the soles of her feet as she tried to run. She woke one night to find her fingers bleeding. When she looked at Cal, he was already awake, sitting upright, eyes wide and staring at the ceiling. "I heard it speaking," he whispered. "It said it used to be me." Emily didn't ask what that meant. They slept in shifts after that. Neither wanted to be the one dreaming. Then, on the 7th night, the humming stopped. For a moment, they felt hope. A dreadful, empty hope. Then the knocking began. A single knock, slow and deliberate, from the other side of the basement door. Then silence. They didn't move. Another knock. Then 3 more. Each a little faster. A little angrier. The knob began to twist again, violently this time. The chair rattled out of place, clattered across the hallway floor. Then something spoke. It wasn't words. It was the sound of words, something that understood language, but not meaning. A crawling, guttural imitation of speech. It said something that might have once been Emily's name, but stretched and warped like it had been underwater for centuries. Cal screamed and threw the dresser in front of the door. Then silence again. When morning came, They didn't speak, didn't eat. They just packed their things and drove until the road ended. They didn't go back. But as they left, Emily swore she saw something in the rearview mirror, just for a moment. A door, standing alone in the field, slightly ajar. Still humming, still waiting. The house didn't sleep. At least, not the way humans did. When night came, it seemed to breathe, a slow, hushed rhythm that whispered through the floorboards and moaned softly through the cracks in the walls. Audrey sat curled on the edge of her bed, one hand clutching the edge of the bedsheet like a lifeline, the other holding her phone tightly, its screen long dead. No signal, no battery, no way to call for help. She hadn't dared leave her room since the knock on the mirror. It hadn't been a hallucination. She knew that now. Someone was inside this house with her, and it wasn't her father. At least not anymore. Footsteps in the hallway had returned the night before. Slow, measured, as if whatever was walking beyond the door didn't want to be heard, but knew it already was. And then, that low, croaking voice. "Audrey, it's me. Let me in. I'm cold." She hadn't moved. Couldn't. She simply pulled the blanket over her head like a child, trembling silently as the voice repeated, distorted, like it was trying to mimic her father's tone, but had never heard a real human speak before. When she finally dared open her eyes, morning had come, but her door was open. Not wide, just a crack, just enough to make her wonder whether it had ever been locked at all. By mid-afternoon, she couldn't take it anymore. Armed with a flashlight, she ventured down the hallway again, calling softly. "Dad!" No answer. Only the creak of the walls, shifting slightly under their own ancient weight. Her breath caught as she passed the mirror. It was no longer foggy with condensation. No dust. It was spotless. Impossibly clean. Her own reflection stared back at her with unsettling clarity, except something about it seemed off. Her eyes in the mirror were a little too wide. The expression a fraction delayed, like a puppet mimicking its master. She turned away, pulse pounding. Down the stairs. Through the foyer. The air was thicker today. She could almost feel it sticking to her skin, like cobwebs that clung even after brushing them away. The door to the basement was open. Not wide, just ajar. Just like her bedroom door. Audrey took one shaky breath, descended slowly, and pulled the door open fully. Darkness spilled out like ink. Her flashlight flickered as if protesting, but she aimed it into the black and stepped down. The wooden steps groaned under her weight. The deeper she went, the colder it became. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying not to shiver. Then she saw the corridor. It wasn't part of the original house layout. She was sure of that. It stretched long and narrow from the edge of the cellar's brick wall, as if someone had carved it into the earth behind the foundation. It shouldn't have been there, but it was. She stepped toward it. A gust of icy air wafted from the tunnel. The kind of chill that didn't just make you cold. It made you remember being cold. The flashlight beam quivered, picking out strange marks along the walls. Symbols? Claw marks? She couldn't tell. The silence deepened. And then she heard it. Weeping. Soft, ragged, and entirely human. "Dad," she called. The weeping stopped. Then a voice replied, distant and cracked. "I found something, Audrey. I shouldn't have. I shouldn't have gone into the walls." She stumbled backward. "I'm coming to get you," the voice continued. "But I don't think I'm myself anymore. I think something's wearing me." Audrey turned and fled. Up the stairs. Through the door. Into the light. But even as she slammed the door shut behind her, she could hear it again. The footsteps on the floorboards. In the mirror upstairs. Laughing. The sky above Willow's End had begun to change. Not the natural ebb of dusk, nor the slow blanketing of nightfall. It was something else entirely. A tint in the clouds like old blood soaked through parchment. A heaviness in the air that pressed on the lungs like wet cloth. Even the birds had stopped singing. Not a single crow cawed from the boughs of the dead trees. Elias woke in a cold sweat. For the first time in weeks, the dream hadn't come. No screaming child, no drowning, no mutilated face. Just silence. And it was worse. He dressed quickly, his fingers trembling as he buttoned his coat. The house was silent too, eerily so. He padded through the hallway barefoot, noting how the shadows seemed thicker, the walls closer. The grandfather clock in the foyer had stopped at 3:33 a.m. It had never stopped before. Downstairs, Marla stood by the kitchen window, unmoving. Her eyes were fixed outside. Elias approached her slowly. "Marla." She didn't respond. Her lips were slightly parted, breath shallow. He followed her gaze out the window and saw it. Across the street, in the lot where the little white chapel used to stand before it was burned down in 1983, there was a door. Just a door. No walls. No building. Just a red door, freestanding, like someone had placed it there and walked away. It stood upright in the overgrown weeds, framed by a crumbling stone arch. The wood looked ancient, water-damaged, yet the brass handle gleamed like it had been freshly polished. There was something faintly humming around it, like static on an old radio. Elias felt his stomach twist. "I dreamed about that," Marla whispered. He turned to her. "What do you mean?" "That door. Last night. I walked through it in my sleep. There was a room, no, a hallway. Endless. Filled with pictures of us. Of people we knew, but wrong. Their faces were scratched out. And she trailed off. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, but she flinched. "You were there," she said quietly. "But it wasn't you." They didn't speak for a while. The door didn't move. It simply waited. By morning, the town was buzzing. People gathered by the chapel's ruins, whispering about the door. Some said it appeared overnight. Others claimed it had always been there. A few elderly residents muttered in hushed tones about the red threshold, an old wives' tale they hadn't heard since childhood. Sheriff Maynard arrived and had it cordoned off with yellow tape. "Town prank," he told the news crew. "Halloween's coming early, I guess." But even he wouldn't approach it. Not after the sound it made when Deputy Harris got too close. A low moan, like something breathing through the keyhole. Later that afternoon, Elias visited the local library. The town's records were patchy, but there was one mention of something eerily similar. The sealed arch of Bellwether Hill, first recorded in 1859, said to be a passage used by the children who disappeared. Elias's pulse quickened. There had been disappearances before. Of course. Willow's End had a long and ugly history of them. Children vanishing without trace. Entire families waking up speaking in strange tongues. Murders blamed on sleepwalking. Always dismissed, always forgotten. But now the pattern returned, and that door stood at the center. That night, Elias returned. The police tape had fallen, shredded like paper. The sky above was pulsing crimson, though no light source was visible. Cicadas screeched in the trees, but they sounded wrong. Too low, like something trying to mimic them. He stood before the red door. It looked taller now, or maybe he was shrinking. There was a whisper on the wind, faint, indecipherable, like a voice behind a wall or a child underwater. Elias reached for the handle. His hand stopped an inch away, trembling. Then he heard it. His name, Elias. He turned around, heart racing. No one there. Then again, softer, "Elias, help me." It was Anna's voice. His sister, dead for 22 years. He didn't remember unlatching the door. Only the cold metal in his palm, and the pressure as it gave way with a groan. Inside was darkness, but not empty darkness, thick, living, like walking into ink. He stepped through. The first thing he saw were photographs. Thousands of them, hanging on strings from the ceiling like grotesque ornaments. They swayed slightly, though no wind stirred. Each one was a different face, some familiar, some forgotten. Children, adults, some smiling, some weeping, some with their eyes burned out. He walked through them carefully. A photo brushed his cheek, and he flinched. It was warm. Then a figure stepped out from the shadows. It wore his mother's face, but it wasn't her. Her eyes were too wide, mouth stretched in an unnatural grin, teeth like jagged nails. "Welcome back," it whispered. Elias turned to run, but the door was gone. Just a blank, rotting wall behind him. He was in, and the red door no longer open to the world he knew. The hallway behind the mirror was narrow, suffocating in its silence. Dust danced in the beam of Lucy's flashlight, and the air grew colder with each step. Neither she nor Eric spoke. They couldn't. It was as if the house itself had reached into their lungs and gripped their breath. They followed the passage until it opened into a room that wasn't on any floor plan they'd seen. The walls were lined with cracked, peeling wallpaper depicting a forest in eternal twilight. Trees twisted toward a bruised sky, and in the center of the room was a child's bed, rotted and sagging under a mound of moth-eaten blankets. But what drew Lucy's eye, what rooted her to the floor, was the single painting on the far wall. It depicted the house they were standing in, but the windows weren't windows, they were eyes. Each pane held a wide, human eye, bloodshot and watching. And at the center of the house, behind the main door, was a grinning mouth with too many teeth. Eric stepped forward slowly, whispering, "That's the front of this house. But it's alive." Lucy nodded. Her stomach churned. She remembered what she'd read in the journal last night. It watches through walls that were once blind. It feeds not on flesh, but on remembrance. "Eric, I think this room was sealed for a reason." He was kneeling beside the bed now, pulling aside the rotted covers. Underneath, there was a crude doll made of straw and animal bones. Its face was stitched with human hair, and where the eyes should have been were two small, polished stones, obsidian, reflecting Lucy's face as though it were warped, stretched. Wrong. Eric dropped the doll, but not before something sharp under it sliced across his palm. "Shit," he muttered, cradling his hand. Blood welled up quickly, staining his sleeve. Lucy moved to help him, but froze. The painting on the wall was changing. The mouth of the house in the image was slowly opening wider, revealing darkness behind rows of jagged teeth. And the windows, those horrible eyes, were turning. They were no longer staring straight ahead. They were looking at them. Eric hadn't noticed. He was too busy wrapping his hand. "It's just an old toy," he said. "It's not even." A low groan echoed through the walls. The wallpaper around them rippled, as if the painted forest was shifting in a breeze only it could feel. The air turned bitter with the scent of rot and wet earth. Something moved behind the wall. Not in the house, inside the wall. Lucy backed toward the door they'd come through. Only it was gone. The passage they had entered through had vanished. The mirror behind them now only reflected the room. This room, in this moment. There was no exit. "Eric." He turned, saw it too. The door they came through was no longer there. But a new one had appeared on the opposite side of the room. Thin, pale wood, almost like bone, with a handle fashioned from something disturbingly organic. The doll began to tremble where it had fallen. Not shake, tremble, like something alive was crawling beneath its skin of straw and hair. And then, in a voice so faint it was barely audible, it whispered, "Don't open the door." Eric stepped back. "Did you hear?" But Lucy wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the door. It was breathing, expanding and contracting, as if it had lungs just beneath its surface. "I don't think it's a door," Lucy whispered. "I think it's a mouth." The whisper came again from somewhere between the walls, beneath the floor, above the ceiling. "Don't let it see." Then the lights, if they could even be called lights, dimmed to a sickly red hue, like blood diluted in water. The doll screamed, and something on the other side of the door began to knock. The snow had begun to fall again, this time heavier than before. Thick flurries churned sideways in the wind like ash from an invisible fire, swirling and spiraling down upon the cabin's roof. Inside, the air had grown heavier, not colder, but denser, as though time itself was pressing down on them. Evelyn sat in the corner, arms wrapped tightly around her knees, whispering a mantra she no longer remembered the meaning of. Jacob had not moved from the fireplace in hours. He stared into the dying embers with hollow eyes, lips twitching as if caught in some silent argument with himself. Thomas sat alone near the boarded-up window, trying to piece together the fragments they had gathered since entering this godforsaken place. The letters, the film reels, the symbols carved beneath the floorboards. It all pointed to something older than any local legend. Not a ghost, not even a demon, but something else. A thinning, a rupture. Somewhere in this forest, beneath the snow, beneath the soil, was a place where the world folded inward. A wound in the flesh of reality. And something had crawled through. He remembered the voice on the tape, the priest whispering about flesh that remembers and bones that hunger. He remembered the phrase scratched into the wall above the dead man's bed. It came before language. That wasn't metaphorical. It was literal. They had been pulled here not by chance, but by memory. The cabin groaned. Evelyn's chant halted, and from the other room, something replied. A scraping sound, long and wet, like nails dragged through meat. Then a low, glottal clicking, not animal, not human, like a language never meant to be heard with ears. Jacob stood, arms trembling, and reached for the shotgun by the mantel. Don't, Thomas warned. That sound, it wants us to react. Jacob ignored him. I saw it last night, at the edge of the trees. Watching, breathing. Evelyn turned to them slowly, her eyes wide and unfocused. It's inside now. The scraping stopped. Then the smell hit them, copper, rot, and the cloying sweetness of something dead too long. It oozed through the cracks in the cabin, coated their tongues, sank into their clothes. The lights dimmed, and then the boards over the bedroom door creaked inward. Not out, as if pushed, but sucked, as if something behind them had inhaled. The wood bowed toward the darkness. Jacob raised the gun and fired. The blast deafened them, but the boards remained intact. And from the other side of the door, something giggled. Not a child's giggle, not even human, but mimicking. Evelyn screamed, backing into the corner and tearing at her own skin as if trying to peel away her body. It's remembering us, she sobbed. It's wearing us. Thomas rushed to her, pulling her hands away from her face. We need to get out. Now. But the floor beneath them had already begun to shift. Not collapse. Shift. As if something massive beneath the cabin had stirred. Jacob ran to the back door. It wouldn't budge. The hinges had sealed over with something that looked like skin. It pulsed when he touched it. We were never supposed to leave, he muttered. This isn't a house. It's a throat. Thomas turned toward the fireplace. It was no longer stone. It had become an eye, and it blinked. Outside, the storm had stopped, but inside, the storm had only begun. I didn't want to go down there again. Even as the others, Michelle, Darren, and even Liza, began gathering their things to descend deeper into the building, I stood frozen in front of the gaping black void of the stairwell leading to the sub-basement. My flashlight flickered as if protesting the decision, and the stale, rotted air that seeped up from below felt thicker than ever, like the earth itself didn't want to give up what was buried inside it. We were looking for answers, yes, but we were also being called. By now, the dreams were no longer limited to nighttime. We'd all admitted it. The sounds of whispering soil, the rhythmic, wet dragging of something enormous, a voice like 1,000 teeth grinding against bones saying, "You belong to the harvest now." When we finally stepped onto the first landing, it felt like the building shifted above us. I could almost swear I heard the old place breathe. The walls grew damper as we descended. Black mold clung to the bricks like bruises, and the occasional streak of rust on metal pipes looked too much like dried blood. The light was scarce, even with our beams, and somehow seemed to absorb into the floor. We reached the bottom, what should have been the end of the basement. But the hallway here wasn't on the original blueprints. A corridor, impossibly long, stretched out into a misty blackness, and at the far end of it, a door. It was made of dark wood, cracked with age, reinforced with rusted iron bands. Carved into the surface was a single word in what looked like dried tar or blood. Harvest. I'm not going in there, Liza whispered, but none of us turned back. The door creaked open with a sound like bones grinding. What lay beyond defied reason. It was a vast chamber, a hall far larger than the building should allow. The walls were lined with sconces, each holding pale, flickering candles that looked as though they burned underwater. The ceiling was impossibly high, vanishing into darkness. And in the center of the room stood a table, a long banquet table set for a feast. But the food, spoiled meat still twitching, bowls of wet, blackened roots pulsing like veins, jars of what looked like preserved eyes. All of it was arranged with ceremony, as though awaiting honored guests. There were chairs, too, old-fashioned, high-backed wooden ones. Most were empty, but not all. A few were occupied by figures slumped forward, heads dipped, as if asleep. One of them wore the same hoodie as our missing friend Owen. Michelle approached the table first, and when she reached out to one of the dishes, a goblet filled with thick red fluid. It moved. The entire table shuddered, as if taking a breath. Something whispered in our heads. Eat and be part of the soil. Feast and become eternal. The walls began to bleed. Not metaphorically. Real blood trickled from the stone, running in slow rivulets toward the center of the room, pooling at the base of the table. The figures in the chairs began to stir, jerking, twitching like marionettes on rusted strings. One lifted its head. It had no face, just a hollow socket where flesh should be, filled with something growing. A mass of roots, worms, and wet, pulsating things like plant tumors. Darren screamed. The door slammed shut behind us. From above, we heard the building groan again. But beneath us, beneath the harvest room, we heard something else entirely. A heartbeat. Not human, not animal. It pulsed in the floor. Alive, awake, and hungry. The house exhaled. It wasn't a metaphor this time. As I stepped into the long abandoned hallway that curved toward the east wing, untouched by restoration crews or curious townsfolk, I heard it. The walls inhaled with a slow, sucking sound like the drag of an ancient lung, and then a soft, trembling exhale that stirred the dust around my ankles. I froze. The flashlight flickered once, twice. Then it died. Complete darkness swallowed me. Not the kind you experience on a cloudy night or inside a basement. This was a deeper dark, heavy and pressing, like the black you see in dreams before the terror starts. I felt the weight of the house shifting. Under my feet, the floorboards pulsed. There was no other word for it. It pulsed like veins feeding blood through rotten timber. I knelt instinctively, placing a palm against the wood. Warm. Too warm. There was movement beneath the floor. Something slow and coiling, like it had been asleep for too long and was now stretching awake. I reached into my pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out the lighter. A weak flame flared to life, casting a shaky orange glow around me. That's when I saw it. The wallpaper wasn't old. It was peeling because it was moist, like the inside of a mouth. Tiny drops of viscous fluid trickled from where the paper curled back. Mold, black, spidery veins of it formed tendrils across the woodwork, and worse, they moved slightly when I looked away, as though they were aware of me now. I backed up into the far wall, and the entire house sighed again, closer this time. There was a door at the end of the hall I hadn't seen before. Carved into it were dozens of faces, mouths open, all screaming in silence. Not painted, not engraved, embedded, as if the wood had grown around them. I turned to run. The hallway had changed. It was shorter now, the walls bending inward, narrowing. Behind me, I heard something drop to the floor with a wet slap, like meat falling from a hook. And then it whispered, a voice right at my ear, but thick and wrong, like someone speaking through submerged lungs. Don't leave yet. It just began breathing again. I bolted, crashing into the now too narrow walls, scraping my shoulders as I pushed through. The hallway didn't want to let me go. Something brushed my ankle, fingers, a tongue, but I didn't stop to check. I just ran until I stumbled into light again, gasping, falling to the floor of the restored library. And as I lay there, heart pounding, I realized what I had entered wasn't just an east wing. It was a lung. This house, this place, was alive, and I had been inside one of its organs. It wasn't just haunted. It was waking up. The storm had finally broken, not with thunder or lightning, but with a silence so profound it pressed against the eardrums like the depths of the sea. Rachel stood at the threshold of room 209. The door was now open, not by force, but as if the house itself had relented. The lock had corroded away in minutes after she whispered the name, Annabelle, 3 times. She hadn't even meant to do it. The name had spilled from her lips in a daze, like a lullaby she'd never learned but always known. Inside, the room was perfectly preserved, dustless, airless. Time had been halted in a single, suffocating moment. The wallpaper was different here, an intricate design of eyes drawn in golden ink, some wide open, others slowly blinking. Each eye followed her as she stepped in. A music box on the desk played for Elise, but the melody was slowed down, distorted. With every rotation, The ballerina figure atop it twisted unnaturally, its limbs bent at wrong angles, its porcelain smile cracking further. Rachel moved to the window. It was night outside, but it was morning just 5 minutes ago. Behind her, the door clicked shut. She didn't panic. Not anymore. Fear had become a second skin. Instead, she turned back toward the room's center, where an old wooden chair now faced her, though it hadn't been there a moment before. And sitting in it was herself, or something that wore her face. Its mouth moved, but the sound came from inside Rachel's own head. "You left me here. You walked out. Now sit. It's your turn." Rachel stepped back, but her legs gave out. The room shifted, expanding and shrinking, like a lung exhaling slow poison. From under the bed came a whisper, not a voice, but a chorus of forgotten names. The previous tenants, the missing ones, the ones the town never acknowledged. "We never left." Suddenly, Rachel felt gravity flip. She wasn't standing anymore. She was hanging, suspended upside down by invisible threads. The floor became the ceiling. Blood rushed her head. Her double still sat upright, eyes wide with mockery. The walls were melting. No, not melting, shedding. The wallpaper peeled back to reveal countless faces, pressed into the drywall like fossilized screams. Their mouths opened in unison, and from them came a guttural chant. "Sit, stay, become." And Rachel understood. This wasn't a haunted house. It was a collector. It gathered echoes, identities, entire selves of those who entered and didn't want to leave. But it was selective. It didn't just take anyone. It took those who cracked, those who questioned too deeply. Rachel was both. She clawed at her reflection, at her double, at herself, until her fingers broke skin and found nothing beneath. Just blackness, as if she'd never truly been alive, only written into existence by some old grief buried in these walls. And then, silence. The deeper Amelia wandered into the old stone corridors of the Black Hall estate, the more it seemed like the house breathed with its own rhythm, a pulse of dread hidden beneath the creaking walls and whispering vents. The air carried a bitter chill now, thick and acrid like burned cloth, and each step echoed with a sound not quite her own. She had followed the path down into a subwing of the house revealed behind a false panel in the East Library. Dust had covered everything, but the floor beneath her feet was strangely clean, as if someone or something had recently used this passage. Ahead, her flashlight flickered. Then it caught something. A door, iron-bound and sealed with rope, black wax smeared along the seams like dried blood. Carved into the surface was an intricate tapestry of human figures, stitched not with thread, but scorched directly into the wood itself. Figures contorted, twisting in impossible agony. She pressed her hand against the wood. It was warm. Behind her, the hallway stretched on in silence. But when she opened the door, something ancient stirred. Inside the room, walls were covered in massive tapestries. Real ones. They lined the stone chamber in rows, draped like funeral cloths. Each tapestry depicted scenes so grotesque they bordered on the inhuman. Ceremonies, mutilations, altars lit by moons that did not exist. And in every scene, a woman with her face missing appeared at the center. Only a smooth void where eyes, nose, and mouth should be. And behind her, always, the crooked man with too many joints. Amelia stepped closer. The light dimmed. The fabric began to tremble. And then she heard it, weeping, faint, feminine, but not human. She spun around. Nothing. But the sound grew louder, filling the space like a pressure against her chest. Then, from one of the tapestries, the stitched eye of a child blinked. The thread squirmed. The image inside the tapestry moved. Amelia backed away, but the weeping intensified, joined by whispering voices behind her ear. She remembers now. She remembers what was taken. Suddenly, the tapestries shuddered, dropping from their mounts as if pushed from behind. A wall was revealed. Stone, smooth, with a doorway painted in ash. Not built, painted. It was just a shadow on the stone. But her fingers tingled as she approached it. The outline shimmered slightly under the light, like heat rising from pavement. And then, A hand reached through. Amelia screamed, but the hand didn't grab her. It simply opened, palm up, and it was a small locket. Hers. The one she had lost in the attic on the first night. The moment she touched it, her mind ruptured open. Memories that weren't hers. A girl screaming in fire. A woman singing without a tongue. The house feeding. The house feeding. The house feeding. When Amelia came to, she was kneeling in the middle of the tapestry room, surrounded by ashes. The tapestries were gone. So was the door. Only the locket remained in her hand, now fused shut and burning cold. From somewhere deep below, she heard a voice. Not screaming, not whispering. It was chanting. Something had begun. The door opened with a groan that echoed far too long. Ethan expected a corridor, maybe another dusty study or a bedroom thick with mold. Instead, he found himself staring into a perfectly square room, illuminated by a soft, sickly glow that didn't seem to come from any single source. There were no light fixtures, no windows, and more disturbingly, no shadows. But most unsettling of all, the room had no corners. Each wall curved gently into the next. Floor into walls, walls into ceiling. No lines, no separation. As if the architecture itself had melted and reformed into something wrong. I don't like this, Lily whispered behind him. Ethan stepped in. His footfalls didn't echo. The room absorbed every sound, every breath. He turned in place, feeling the subtle pull of vertigo. There was no reference point, nothing to ground his vision. And then, in the far wall, something shifted. It was subtle at first, a shimmer like heat rising from asphalt. Then it rippled, and the wall blinked. Not opened, blinked. A massive, lidless eye had revealed itself, pupil-wide and colorless, surrounded by a pulsing ring of red veins embedded in the wall's curvature. Lily screamed. Ethan tried to move, but the floor beneath him had softened, gone pliable. His feet were sinking into the material. Not quite liquid, not quite solid, like wet flesh. The eye dilated, and then came the voice, not spoken aloud, but pressed directly into their minds. You stepped into what was never meant to be walked. It was not a threat, not a curse. It was a fact. Lily clutched Ethan's arm, sobbing. We have to go. Please. Ethan, it's in my head. It's in my... She dropped to her knees, eyes wide and empty, mouth moving without sound. Let her go. Ethan shouted into the void. The walls pulsed in reply. The eyes slowly closed, but not in retreat, in satisfaction. Then just like that, the floor hardened beneath their feet. The walls returned to matte stillness. The light dimmed. Lily stirred. Her eyes were wet, but focused again. I saw it, she whispered. I saw what it is. Ethan didn't ask. He wasn't ready to know. They backed out of the room, but the memory followed. So did the smell, damp, electric like air before lightning. The door shut behind them on its own. They didn't speak for a long time. The manor had gone utterly silent. Even the wind through the broken windows seemed to hold its breath. And then Ethan said, quietly, We're not dealing with a haunting. This isn't a ghost. No, Lily replied, voice hollow. This house was built to contain it. The hallway was no longer recognizable. Walls that had once echoed with the soft creaks of aging were now pulsating, flesh-like, slick, and breathing slowly, as if the house itself had begun to inhale. Cold drafts slithered across Ava's ankles, and she could feel the pressure in her ears build with every step deeper into the newly formed corridor. The photographs that once lined the walls had been replaced by indentations, human-sized impressions, as though the house had absorbed the missing family members into itself. She held the flashlight in front of her, its beam flickering like a dying heartbeat. Every so often, she would catch a glimpse of something just out of reach. Movement within the seams of the walls, fingers pulling back into the plaster, eyes blinking from impossible places. Somewhere ahead, a lullaby was playing, but it was twisted now, out of tune, off rhythm, slowed down and reversed. She recognized the melody. Her mother used to hum it in the nursery. Only now, it was punctuated by soft, wet sounds, like breath being drawn through waterlogged lungs. Ava paused at a blackened door at the end of the hall. It hadn't been there before. Its surface was warped and damp, as though it had recently emerged from the depths of a lake. Symbols were carved into it, spirals, teeth, eyes stitched shut, and beneath them, a phrase written in a child's hand. The room doesn't wait. It remembers. She reached for the knob. It wasn't metal. It was warm like skin, and it twitched beneath her fingers. The door swung inward with a moist crack, revealing a room submerged in shadow. The air was thick. Breathing it felt like inhaling syrup. Every instinct told her to run, but something in the room pulled at her thoughts, like the pressure of a dream she couldn't wake from. Inside, she saw it. The cradle. It was untouched by dust or time, rocking slowly, even though no one was near it. The mobile above it spun without wind, bones dangling from threads of hair, clinking softly. And lying within the cradle wasn't a baby. It was her mother's face. Not a head, just a face, stretched over something that breathed. Ava, it whispered, though the lips didn't move. I missed you. You left me in the dark. She stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp that shattered into 1,000 insect-like pieces. Something stirred in the walls. A low hum. No, not a hum. A voice speaking through the wood. She opened the wrong door. And you were born. The floorboards swelled, pushing her upward. Shadows spilled across the ceiling like blood and water. The face in the cradle began to crack, splitting down the middle like a porcelain mask, revealing something vast and ancient beneath. An eye without shape, an idea without name. She ran, but the hallway was no longer behind her. There were only doors now, some locked, some breathing, some whispering, and behind all of them, memories that never belonged to her. The black room had opened, and it was hungry. I never thought I'd see the top of the bell tower. The structure loomed over Ainsley Boarding School like a crooked finger pointing to a god that had long since gone deaf. Few had ever climbed it. Legend said the stairs broke after a certain height, and that anyone who reached the belfry would hear voices not from this world, whispering sins they hadn't committed yet. But tonight I climbed. The stairs groaned like old bones beneath my feet, and with each step, the chimes of the clock seemed to stretch longer, deeper, no longer bound to the rhythm of time, but to something older, something waiting. I wasn't alone. Evelyn was with me. Her lantern lit the spiraling path, but even its warm glow couldn't dispel the presence that coiled around the stones like mist. Every window we passed showed a different sky. One was starless, one showed a burning crimson moon, and another had something crawling across the glass from the outside. We didn't speak. We couldn't. Something was listening. When we finally reached the wooden landing beneath the bell, we found a door we were never meant to find. Not in any blueprint, not in any rumor. The door was metal, rusted, and sealed with 7 locks. Symbols were etched into the frame, some resembling constellations, others like twisted versions of school crests long since abandoned. Evelyn stepped forward, holding the final page of the journal that had led us here. Her hand trembled as she read aloud the Latin inscription. Non sunabit pro tempore, sunabit pro veritate. It will not toll for time. It tolls for truth. Each lock clicked open with the weight of memory. And then silence. We opened the door. It wasn't a room. It was a mirror, but the reflection wasn't ours. In that glass was the true Ainsley. The bones of missing students lined the walls like trophies, and shadowy figures drifted through the corridors, forever reliving their last day. We saw Clara, still clutching her violin. We saw Headmistress Greaves, weeping blood. We saw ourselves, but not quite. We were twisted, smiling versions of who we were, standing behind the glass, as if watching us. A bell began to toll. The sound didn't come from above, but from within. Our chests tightened. Evelyn dropped to her knees. I staggered back, clutching my ears, but the sound was inside my head, a scream drawn out into eternity. The mirror cracked, and then it shattered. The wind that rushed out was not air. It was memory, regret, and something else. The tower shook. The stairs crumbled. I grabbed Evelyn and jumped. We fell, not into death, but into something stranger. When I awoke, I was lying in the courtyard. It was morning. The school stood silent. No one remembered the night before. No one remembered Evelyn, except me. She never made it out. But sometimes when I pass by the ruined bell tower, I hear a single, mournful chime. And I remember the truth, even when no one else does, even when they tell me. Ainsley never had a bell tower, and I'm starting to believe them. But I still hear it, and one day, it will toll again.